right, normal and emergency procedures for the King Airs. We are going to do this via some examples. But before we get to that, I want to discuss some definitions that are interesting. Immediate action items. What is an immediate action item?
Something you gotta do now?
Something you gotta do now off the top of your head. Yeah, so this is straight out of the POH, right at the beginning of the emergency procedure section. You can see that note there says an immediate action procedure are delineated by bold type with remaining procedures following. So anything bold we know as memory items, that's just another word for it. Interestingly enough, I've actually talked to a few FAA people about this, and someone actually at one point told me if you can immediately pull out the checklist, immediately open to the right page, and immediately do the procedure, you're covered by an immediate action item, which isn't necessarily true because the FAA out of their FISMs says this: immediate action items defined by the FAA are those items accomplished from memory by crew members in emergency situations before the checklist is called for and read. So the FAA specifically does say it is done by memory before even calling for the checklist. So under that reference, if an engine failure happened in the King Air, the memory items are completed without even saying engine failure or engine failure checklist. It's just done immediately. Questions? That's the definitions out of Volume 3, Chapter 2 of the FAA FISMs, if anyone wants to go find that. All right, scenario time for our emergency procedures. So, you experience all your avionics shut off. Everything you would expect to see on your avionics bus has now shut off. Who wants to do it? You want to do it?
So, okay, all avionics are out?
All avionics are out. So, you're opening up the checklist, probably looking, the backside unfortunately doesn't have any reference pages to it. Most people will flip to emergencies first. This is a fun one. It's not actually an emergency, it's an abnormal, sort of.
Avionics master power switch failure.
All right, where's that?
4.
All right, good news. I already have it up here too. I figured I'd just let someone open up the checklist. So we see that down here on the bottom. Avionics master power switch failure is what we have chosen. That says there, for those that can't read that, if the avionics master power switch fails to operate in the on position avionics master circuit breaker pull, which is on the right side panel. Now, for those of us that have gone to flight safety or SimCom, did you do this at SimCom at all? Do they still do it at flight safety this way? They do? Okay, well, bummer.
Well, I mean, I haven't done it for a couple of times, but I've done it at flight safety.
So I'll also show you straight the Raytheon checklist. So this is, the right one is the just manufacturer pilot checklist. It says the exact same thing on it as well, and stuff at the top. If the avionics master power switch fails to operate on position, avionics master circuit breaker pull. So we're doing a little bit of troubleshooting here. I will tell you that you reach over and you pull the circuit breaker and nothing happens.
Well, everything's off already. You pull the breaker.
Yeah.
It's not going to do anything.
Doesn't quite make sense, does it? This is where something very interesting happens. Both checklists, or almost any checklist that you find in an aircraft, is called an abbreviated checklist. Does anyone know the definition of an abbreviated checklist?
Not all of it.
Yeah, it's not all of it. There are things missing on it. Specifically, there is something that they do not include on it called notes. So here is the POH version of that checklist, again, in emergency, abnormal procedures. Avionics master power switch failure. If the avionics master switch fails to operate in the on position, avionics master circuit breaker pull. But hey, there's a note this time, which is going to explain a little bit to us about what's happening. And obviously, I'm guessing you guys can't read that from back there. So turning, and I'm going to say this slowly because and I was hoping for a whiteboard here too. Turning on the avionics master power switch removes power that holds the avionics relay open. So flipping that switch on is removing power from a relay, which will then spring load to the closed position. So it's a kind of a backwards circuit. If the switch fails to the off position, pulling the avionics master circuit breaker will remove power from the relay and should restore power to the avionics buses. So this is called a reverse logic circuit, basically. If you remove power to this relay, that switch is going to spring load to the closed position. That's the methodology behind pulling this circuit breaker.
So it said though, if switching it to off somewhere within that node.
Right?
So, but nowhere does it say turn the switch off.
Right. So this is where things get really interesting. I'm wondering if I have this. Not have notes. Is this even the correct checklist for the issue at hand? From a troubleshooting standpoint.
Maybe, it might be the master.
Maybe, maybe not. This goes back kind of, Steve was talking about it at the first one, the 90 doesn't have a dual gen failure checklist.
Right.
So there are some things that are left out that you have to kind of surmise yourself. So on these emergency procedures, we have to rely on just our knowledge of the system. And I, of course, picked one of the more difficult ones that we have to have knowledge on. This is not the correct procedure, because I will tell you now, if you've followed this checklist so far at this point, you have begun to smell smoke in the cockpit due to a short in the system. Basically, the only way that the avionics can be shut off in flight is 1, you turn the switch off, or 2, there is a short on the wire coming from the switch to that relay, it closes. Because if there's a short, that's like you turning that switch to the off position. The off position is reverse logic, so off actually means power on that line to the relay. So that short is causing all your avionics to turn off. The circuit breaker doesn't do anything because it's upstream of things and won't provide any help for you. This has actually happened in a few King Airs, many King Airs actually, where there was a short on the system and it would turn off all the avionics and the crews just kind of kept flying because the checklist they assumed would fix the problem as far as avionics off. When in fact this checklist is specifically talking about the avionics master power switch failure. It's the switch position. So you would have to be in flight and physically see this tiny little switch flip to the bottom position in flight. Have you ever known a switch in a plane as sturdy as the switches in the King Airs to just boop? Have you ever heard of that?
Switch breakers, but no.
Yeah, not just a normal switch. It doesn't happen. The chances are extremely, extremely rare for that to happen.
So this is literally talking just about the switch itself.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So again, it goes back to, like Steve had mentioned, there's a lot of things in the under 12,500 category of airplanes that they just, whatever, we're not going to talk about because it's not really required. So you have to rely for emergency procedures and even some normal procedures on just base knowledge of the system to get through the issue.
So where did you found this in the POH
Yeah.
itself?
So this is the POH right here with the note in it.
So when would we know, like if something happened to, you pull out the QRH, you've got something in there for what you think is happening, you do it, it doesn't do anything, or you'd be like, well, let's pull out the POH and see if there's notes on it or something like that. Pretty
Yeah.
much.
If you got the time for it, yeah. And it comes down, I think also, Beach does this a lot, because I saw it in Baron Bonanzas and the 200 all the time too, is there's a lot of checklists that are misleading. Like on the 200, if you got a dual bleed air failure, well, there's a checklist that says left or right bleed air failure. Everyone would do that, but it was completely incorrect for the situation because it said or. You have to be really specific because these checklists are so tiny and they don't include everything. If the title wording doesn't say exactly the problem you are having, it's probably not going to be the right checklist. It might have some items in it that are relevant to the situation and could lead you to the right direction, but the items in it might screw you up or take you down the wrong road.
Right. Okay.
All right. So, note caution warnings. These are the things that are included in checklists. Cautions and warnings will be found in an abbreviated checklist. So those are Those are more severe items, obviously. Notes are nice, just emphasis items on certain areas that might lead you down the right road. Like you realized in the original checklist, well, that makes no sense how pulling a circuit breaker would work.
Mhm.
Well, a note explains it. Out of the POH again, in section 1 general, the definition of warning, caution, and a note. A note is an operating procedure or technique which is considered essential to emphasize. A caution is a procedure or technique which could result in damage to equipment if not carefully followed. And the warnings are operating procedure techniques which could result in personal injury or loss of life if not carefully followed. So getting more severe. And they do hold true to that very carefully. If you see a warning, typically involves smoke or fire or some sort of danger to human life versus a caution, which is just operational, mechanical type stuff. Questions, comments, concerns, rude remarks, rude gestures? Quiz time. Which of the following is the definition of an immediate action item? A checklist that follows only a red master warning indicator. B, the items completed from a checklist by memory before the checklist is called for. Or C, the items that must be completed immediately.
Well,
Most correct.
by whose standard?
By the FAA's. The book definitions. Or just wait until the last slide. What type of checklist will not contain notes? A, manufacturer. B, abbreviated. C, AFMPH. Which of the following describes a note found on a checklist? Both B and C. Why I did it backwards, I'm not sure. Something that was needed to be emphasized to prevent damage to the airframe. C, a technique or operating procedure that was considered an emphasis.
Emphasized is.
Emphasizing. Did I spell it wrong?
No.
Oh.
It's just.
A caution, if not followed, will cause personal injury. Did I skip one?
No.
And finally, loss of life could occur if the technique in a blank is not carefully followed. Caution warning. Good job.
So we're done.
Ah, shut. Wait, which one?
Oh, I got 2 wrong.
Oh, yes, I would.
I got 3 and 4 wrong.